Well, greetings and salutations, folks. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to this night-ending bonus upload. Before we jump on into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And now finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this night-ending bonus upload, shall we? Today's first encounter. This happened to me back in the 1970s when I was a camp counselor at a local summer camp. The camp catered to middle school students ranging from ages 11 to 14, give or take. The setup is almost what you would think if you watch a lot of horror movies about summer camps. The counselors were high school and college-age students who had the bare minimum of experience and who were subject to very little adult overview. I do not want to mention the name of the camp because I don't know what the rules are about things like this, and I do not want to get myself or anyone else in trouble. But I will tell you that it still stands to this day, and what happened to myself and another counselor has become somewhat of a legend around that camp. That's still told around late-night campfires to this very day. Going into this, I thought it was going to be a fairly easy gig that would look great on college applications. I was going to be there full-time all summer long. My job was overseeing the recreational activities of the kids. The camp was several towns away from me, and I didn't know anyone else who was going to be attending the camp or working there, but I was young and popular, and it was easy for me to make friends and get along with people. It was a simpler time back then, and compared to nowadays, the rules were so incredibly relaxed for the counselors and attendees alike that it would be almost unbelievable for me if I did not live it myself. It was just fun in the sun by the lake, and I was actually hoping to meet a girl or two while I was there. Little did I know, I would get much more than I bargained for. That's a fact as well. It was normal back then for the counselors to arrive about a week or so earlier than the kids attending in order to help get things organized and to meet and get to know one another. The older staff and people actually running things thought it best for the counselors to spend some time together and build some trust, friendship, camaraderie in order to be more effective and to just be able to run the basic day-to-day activities and goings-on without much help from the higher-ups. There was a management office in one of the cabins where a grown-up would be on call 24/7 in case of any emergencies, and there were a few other grown staff as well here and there. But for the most part, it was up to us counselors and kids to figure it out on our own. We didn't mind, though. It was freedom and fun. As I said, I was really looking forward to getting started. I arrived the same day as most of the other young counselors and was immediately surprised to see just how deep in the woods the counselors' cabins were located. With my Jeep being an off-road vehicle, I had gotten the required permit for it to be driven down to the cabin and left parked there. It was efficient because if there was any real emergency, we had access to my vehicle. Everyone else, unless they got a special permit, had to park in the lots at the entrance of the camp. Most likely, except for on days off, they wouldn't be using their cars much anyway. It was understood that my vehicle would almost become communal, should I choose to park it in the area of the counselors' cabins. Men stayed with men, women stayed with women, but the cabins themselves were all meshed together in little groups. And I was relieved that everyone who was in my area was friendly and seemingly outgoing. We spent the first night having a few beers and telling tales around the campfire. There were a few people there who were local to the area, and they were trying to tell us the usual stories about things that roam the woods looking for blood and other entities that go bump in the night. I took it all with a grain of salt, but could see some of the females were laughing nervously by the end of the campfire tales. We stayed up pretty late that night, and as far as things go, it was a fairly uneventful night. I was optimistic, and the 3 other guys assigned to the cabin I was going to be staying in seemed cool and down to earth. Yeah, it was already shaping up to be a fine summer indeed. If only my optimism had been left to last more than a few days. We spent the next few days going over the rules and regulations and learning the area. Management and the people in charge introduced themselves and walked us through the trails to show us where all of the various activities were to be held and where the chow hall was and such. The lake was gigantic, man-made, but very beautiful, and I could not wait to go swimming. We were warned to stay with at least one other person and never to go roaming the woods alone, in case we should fall or otherwise sustain some sort of injury. We were encouraged to use the buddy system, so to speak, just as we were told to instruct the kids to do. The one certification we all needed was first aid and CPR, so at least we were prepped in that way. I think otherwise we were all completely clueless about what to expect, but a couple of the other people who had been there the previous years were very helpful with the majority of us who were new. I, however, could be counted upon to break the rules and do my own thing, and that's exactly what got me into trouble I got into within the first few days of being there. By this time, it had been about day 3 and everything was going well. I had made friends with everyone, and even had a female I had my eye on who I decided was going to be mine for the summer. Hey, what can I say? I was 18 after all. Anyway, let's get to my encounter now that I gave you some background. I woke up on the 3rd or 4th day. I asked a few of the guys who were in my cabin if they wanted to go to the lake and swim with me and just hang out and catch some sun. The previous days, though fairly easy, had been preparation for when the kids got there. We finally had a few hours of downtime before we got back to actually working. None of them wanted to go with me, though, and so I was going to have to go by myself. I got my things together and headed out. I decided to take my Jeep, though it was prohibited to be driving except for in emergencies. I figured I would plead ignorance if I were caught or tattled on, and that would be that. Like I said, none of us were taking things that seriously. Also, our buddy system was not supposed to consist of male and female staff being alone together. If that were the case, we were supposed to find a third person to accompany us whenever we were going, even if it was just to hang out. When I got into my Jeep, I ran into a girl named Cheryl, coming out of one of the cabins next to mine. She had a bikini top and some shorts, and was holding a towel. I asked her if she was going down to the lake, and she said she was. I offered her a ride and told her that's where I was going as well. She hopped into the Jeep, and we drove down to the lake together. It was an absolute gorgeous summer day. The water was actually warm. There was no one else down at the lake, but neither of us cared, and we just hung out and talked and swam. We swam out to one of the docks in the middle of the lake and decided to get some sun. Everything was quiet, and it was a perfect day. I wanted to hit on this girl so badly, but I also wanted to get to know her better first. So I refrained from making a move on her, and we just lied there sunbathing on the dock, getting to know each other. Eventually, we were both quiet, just lying there with our eyes closed, relaxing in the moment, and enjoying the peace and quiet before the kids came in a few days. when all of a sudden we heard this extremely loud splash in the water, far off in the distance, and it was followed by an extremely loud sound. It was like a moan and a bellow all at the same time. Cheryl jumped up and looked across the lake to where the sounds seemed to have come from, and I was already alert and looking as well. She asked me if I had heard the sounds too, and I told her I had. We didn't hear anything else for a few minutes, and we eventually figured that maybe it was some other counselors from across the lake who were also having fun in the water while they were able to. However, from the moment we heard that noise, everything seemed eerie. It came out of nowhere, this creepy feeling, but we were both definitely aware of something in the air. We finally laid back down, and when we did, it wasn't more than a minute or two before we heard what sounded like loud splashing and that same bellowing noise that we had just heard. This time, though, it sounded like it was getting closer. We turned to look exactly at the same time and couldn't believe what we were seeing. Coming across the lake and directly in our direction was some sort of creature. It wasn't swimming, mind you, but it was almost as if it was walking, except it was wildly flailing its arms and making these horrific, loud noises. We didn't know what to do. Back then, while I'm sure there were people who knew what creatures like Bigfoot or Sasquatch was, it wasn't a common thing like it is today. I know now that what we were looking at was a Sasquatch, and that it seemed intent on getting us. It was extremely fast for its size, though it was far away still. Just by its splashes, it was making its arms flailing around like that. It seemed to be absolutely gigantic, and this thing was loud as well. We were definitely in full-blown panic at this point and did not know what to do. We definitely didn't want to just sit there and wait for it to get us, but we also did not want to get back in the water. Like I said, this thing was moving incredibly fast, especially for its size. And we weren't sure we would be able to swim out of there. We sat there trying to decide for another minute or two before, without saying a word, Cheryl dove into the water and took off swimming in the opposite direction of the creature, back toward where I had parked my Jeep. I'd left my keys in the Jeep, and I knew she was planning on leaving me there. She was scared, but I was as well, and I'd be damned if I was going to stick around and see what this thing wanted. I dove in after her, yelling, "Wait up!" She didn't even acknowledge me and kept swimming as fast as she could. I was a little ways behind her because I could hear the splashing getting closer and closer. This thing was gaining on me, and the noises it was making seemed more disturbing as the seconds ticked. I don't know how I managed to continue swimming with the fear that had risen up in me. Maybe it was adrenaline, I don't know. I watched as Cheryl made it to land about 2 or 3 minutes before I would, and she ran right to my Jeep and started looking for the keys. I yelled for her to wait, but she didn't seem like she was going to wait for me. Luckily, I was fast enough and was able to get into the Jeep with her before she started it and took off. Neither one of us could take our eyes off this fastly approaching creature that was now just getting out of the water. I honestly don't know how deep the water was in the middle of the lake, but this thing was absolutely gigantic. No lie, it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It had now reached land. Cheryl started the Jeep and pressed the gas, but she never took her eyes off the creature and slammed into a tree. The damage to my Jeep was minimal, though, and she immediately went to back up in order to take off and get back on the trail and back to safety of the cabins and other people. However, once she backed up and before we knew what hit us, this gigantic clawed hand/paw grabbed her by her hair and started trying to drag her out of the vehicle. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, and this thing was upset. I tried punching it in its arm, and honestly, I'm ashamed to admit it. I thought about letting it take her and just driving off myself. I thought about it, but I didn't do it. I did everything I could to get it to let her go. The only thing that saved her was the fact that the doors were still on, and it was trying to lift her sideways through the door and not up and out. I started screaming along with her because I didn't know what else to do, and the thing suddenly seemed startled. It was like it snapped back to reality when it had made eye contact with me. It then grabbed her by the back of her head where it had been grabbing her hair all along and smashed her face hard against the steering wheel and then ran off. As it disappeared into the woods, it made more of those disgusting and horrifying howling noises, and then it was gone. Keep in mind, it took me longer to type this than it did for the entire encounter in the Jeep to have happened. It was only a couple of seconds. Cheryl was crying and bleeding from her face, and she seemed to be in shock. I tried to reach out to her and see the damage, but she recoiled from me in horror and stared at me wide-eyed and unblinking. I had to slap her gently to get her to snap out of it and get her to get out of the driver's seat so I could drive us to the emergency cabin and get her first aid. How the hell were we going to explain this? She had scratches all underneath her hair, on the back of her neck, and a few on her shoulders. Some of her hair had been ripped out. We finally made it to the nurse's station. The nurse was a little old lady who seemed like she was over 100 years old. She had also been working on and off at the camp for 30 years. She was immediately concerned, but patched Cheryl up and told her she would have significant bruising around her nose and eyes for a while, but she would otherwise be okay. I told her a story of us hitting a tree and the impact of it made Cheryl hit her face on the steering wheel, but the nurse was not buying it. Cheryl agreed with me, though she was still only nodding, her eyes wild and full of fear. I was trying to give her a look to snap out of it, but she wasn't understanding. She was not disputing my story, though, and that's what mattered to me at the time. I thought maybe I'd get blamed for this. I mean, who in their right mind is going to believe that some crazed monster ran through the lake and attacked us, only to simply give up and run off after a minute? Even now, after all of these years, I still have trouble believing it. The nurse wanted to see the damage to my Jeep, which again was minimal. The weirdest thing happened, though. She told us not to mention the accident to anyone else, and forgot that it ever happened. It was like she knew something more than what she was willing to let on to. While still letting us know she believed us, she believed the unspoken things we hadn't said, and it seemed Cheryl's injuries were speaking to the old nurse for themselves. I went back to my cabin and pretended to be sick for the rest of the day and never saw Cheryl again. The other girls said she had come back into the cabin with her injuries on her face and neck, but didn't say a word. She packed up her belongings, all the while crying hysterically, and then simply left. She didn't even say goodbye to anybody, and that was that. Believe it or not, I was very easily able to put this in the back of my mind. The rest of the summer was uneventful. I had fun at my job. I tried not to think about what had happened to me and Cheryl at the lake that day, but I was much more cautious than I otherwise would have been had it not happened to us, especially when it came to the kids. I never went anywhere alone again, and wouldn't go near the lake unless there were more than a few people with me. At the time, I didn't know anything about creatures like this, but I am sure now that this is what we experienced because the area where this particular camp sits is a hot spot for these creatures and their activity. Not only that, but aggressive and hostile encounters come out of this area all the time. Recently, the area had reports all over the internet about someone coming across two of these creatures beating each other. Obviously, to the two human beings standing around watching them. I know this is going to be hard for some people to believe, but I know what I experienced, and it still affects me to this day. I obviously don't work at the camp anymore, and so many things have changed, but when I do go camping or hiking in the woods, I'm more alert and aware of my surroundings, and find it hard to relax sometimes. I often wondered what happened to Cheryl and if she ended up being okay. I don't know what else to say except be careful out there and don't ever think you know for sure that any creature, whether it cryptid or just a regular animal out there in the woods, has any discernible temperament. There's so much unknown out there, especially in the woods. One other thing I think about is the missing people all over the world who are disappearing in a blink of an eye. Are they being abducted like the way this thing was trying to take Cheryl? In my opinion, that's most likely exactly what's happening. At least some of the time. I could never say for sure for obvious reasons. All right, guys, to me that really sounded more like a Dogman than a Sasquatch. And I'm going to share with you the reason why I feel like it. First of all, it was 1970s. This kid didn't even really know much about Sasquatch, let alone Dogman, and no one was talking about Dogman at that time. Also, Tim Baker, Coonbo, had to go back in like the late 90s, early 2000s and revisit his older experiences or accounts that he had from other people. And figure out if there was any misidentification, which there were. So, I mean, the way this guy describes it, it had hands/paws with long nails, long claw-like nails, and the howling. To me, that just sounds more like a Dogman than a Bigfoot. But, it's what you guys want to think, If Tim was willing to go back and look at his misidentifications, I think and he admitted that on the channel. He's probably admitted that more than once on many other interviews. I'm not really sure. I've only listened to him talk to me. But, for him to realize that, hey, maybe I had maybe I didn't identify these things properly, mistaken identity and stuff like that. And then realized, hey, some of these accounts that I thought were Bigfoot were actually a Dogman. So, who knows? Anyway, let's get into tonight's second encounter. Final encounter. In 2009, I met the woman that I'd eventually marry, and for the purposes of this, we'll call her Tina. Tina and I met through mutual friends, and we hit it off right away. While I could gush about our love for pages on end, I will get to the point somewhat and say that the one thing I was so happy to find out we had in common was our love for the outdoors. Once she told me how much she enjoyed hiking, camping, and all things involving the wilderness, I knew that she was the one for me. We got married in 2010 and decided that on our honeymoon we were going to rent a secluded mountain cabin in Colorado and spend the entire time exploring the woods and all of the beautiful things that nature had to offer in this incredibly exceptional area of the country. We found the most perfect little one-bedroom cabin that was listed as a secluded rustic cabin in the woods and planned staying 7 nights in this cabin, but only after camping nearby for 3 days. Our first night out there in the tent was incredible. While neither of us was by any means scared of the woods or worried about staying in a tent, the weather was not ideal. And we were just hoping it would clear up just a bit so we could enjoy the numerous hiking trails. It was almost pouring by the time we had gotten the tent set up. This was not the weather on Google had predicted, and there was no cell phone service throughout most of the area for us to even check if this pouring rain was going to last the whole 3 days we were stuck out here. We were on our honeymoon, though, and we were both going to make the best of it, no matter what happened. The first night was uneventful and comfortable inside the tent. When we woke up the next morning, it was still downpouring, and we decided to spend the day in the tent, hanging out and doing what newlyweds do. Once night fell, however, a sort of ominous feeling came over us. Aside of the sound of the pouring rain down on our tent, there was nothing else. I know that we should have at least still heard owls hooting or some sort of critters running through, trying to find food or seeking shelter, but there was none of that. The rain slowed a bit right before bedtime, so we stepped out of the tent and stretched our legs. I think it's important to mention that at this point we were still having fun. We were young and in love and simply enjoying each other's company. It didn't matter where we were, what the conditions were, or what we were and were not doing. My new wife kept saying how romantic it all was, just the two of us trapped in a tent and reined in the middle of the woods at night with no one else around. I tended to agree until we stepped out when the rain had subsided a bit. As soon as we were outside of the tent, we looked at each other as though a realization had hit us both the exact same time. We felt creeped out, like we were being watched. There was an electricity in the air and a menacing quality that was attached to it. Both of us had grown up in areas where we played in the woods all day long, and every single spare chance we got, so we could feel it in our bones something sinister was happening. We decided to ignore it and continued with our romantic next couple of days, though I think we were both secretly wishing time would speed up so we could just be warm and comfortable in that cabin and get a real shower. Ignoring the primal feelings of dread that quickly rose within us, we got back into the tent and got ready for bed. I'd say it was around 2 a.m. when I was suddenly startled out of a deep sleep to a sound of something in the woods outside of our tent. I sat very still and quietly trying to figure out what it was, or what could be possibly making those strange noises I was hearing. I realized quickly it started further away and got closer and closer as the seconds were passing. At first it sounded like an animal. The steps were heavy, and there was a strange animalistic grunting sound accompanying each step. I couldn't be sure if there were one or many of whatever it was, but I was starting to get really scared. I looked over at my wife, and she was sound asleep with a gentle smile on her face. So I was reluctant to wake her up. I thought maybe she would realize that her husband was a coward and laugh at me or something. I don't know, I figured I would laugh with her about it the next day after I figured out what it was. Once I snapped out of this train of thought and went back to listening to what was happening outside of the tent, I realized it had suddenly stopped. Not only had the weird noises stopped, but the rain had also slowed to a drizzle, and I was considering stepping out of the tent. It wasn't so much that I wanted to come face to face with whatever was out there. The thing seemed, from its footfalls, to be massive, but more to ease my own mind, that it was nothing more than a regular, albeit large animal looking back. I wonder if there was something telling me that perhaps this was not an animal. Because as I write this and re-examine my train of thought, what else could it have been, right? At least, what else would I be thinking it was, and why? Just as I was about to open the tent and step out, I heard a low and very guttural growl, and what sounded like something being struck by lightning. I accidentally let out a cry of surprise and fell backwards a little bit, effectively waking my wife up. She jumped up and immediately concerned and asked me what was going on. I put my finger to my mouth, telling her to be quiet, and we both listened. Wide-eyed at this and what was going on outside of our tent. The footfalls, the groans, the growls seemed to progress as time went on. It felt like hours that we were sitting there listening, but I'm sure now it was only just a few moments. My wife was shaking. She was petrified. It wasn't like we were scared of animals being outside or anything. I mean, we were both used to being in the woods and everything that comes with it, including animals and the sounds in general. There was something just off about this thought, though. The sounds didn't only sound animalistic, but they also somehow at the same time sounded human as well. It sounded like something was rummaging around out there and tearing through the trees nearby. As soon as we thought it was further away and we were safe to look, it would sound like it was right outside of our tent. We didn't know what to do, and there was no denying how my wife and I were both not only confused, but terrified as well. There was even a point in all of this where it sounded like this thing, whatever it was sniffing around awfully close to our tent. Literally, it sounded like someone or something who has some sort of sinus problem and can't breathe, and no matter how hard they try to sniff up. Well, I use the term someone or something loosely because at this point we both realized there was no way this was a human. It also didn't sound like any animal we knew or ever heard of. Finally, I had enough and decided to just look outside of the tent, pulling the flap aside very slowly. I looked with one eye outside of the tent and was immediately met with a gigantic red eye staring right back at me in the loudest, meanest, strangest howling, growling sound I had ever heard. I screamed at the top of my lungs and fell backwards, which caused Tina to start screaming and freaking as well. We both sat there in our tent as this thing continued to howl in the air and sniff around the opening of the tent. Now it's important to tell you that we never saw anything except for the one red eye I had originally seen when I looked out, and some sort of weird nose snout thing that was pervaded by the tent a bit, the whole while trying to smell us out. I don't know how or why this thing wasn't able to maneuver the flap on the tent to get through, but I'm sure it would not have been good for me or my wife if it had. We watched in horror as this massive shadow of this thing we called the creature stomped around outside of the tent, back and forth, in and out of the surrounding woods. I don't know what time it was when this thing finally made its way back to wherever it had come from, away from us, but as far as I can remember, the sun was just coming up. This went on for a couple hours. Once the sun had risen, my wife and I stepped cautiously out of the tent in order to try and see if we could find any evidence of what in the world we had just witnessed and experienced that night. It was almost unbelievable when we started to look around. There were these very strange footprint impressions left in the mud from all of the rain. They were bigger and oddly shaped than anything I had ever seen in my entire life. I would dare say to you now, they were larger than any human footprint I had ever seen, but definitely not shaped like one. The damage done to the immediate area outside of our tent was incredible. There were trees bent, snapped, clawed immediately noticed, as well as there was still no animal activity anywhere, no squirrels, no tiny reptiles running, nothing. There wasn't even the usual sounds of birds welcoming us into the morning. Though the rain had completely stopped, my wife and I decided we didn't want to cook. Not that there was anything left of our food, and our coolers were scattered in pieces. And we just wanted to pack up and get back out of there as fast as possible. We gathered what was left of our belongings, all the while still feeling like we were being watched, and started on the trail back to where we parked our vehicle. It took us about 4 hours to get down there in the first place, and we made it back in a little less than 2. I'm aware that what I am about to say to you after all of this may sound crazy. The creature itself wasn't the strangest thing about the entire incident, nor was the incredible damage we had seen once we left our tent. What my wife and I still agree to this day The strangest thing of all was the weather. Once we got about a half a mile away from where we had set camp up, it was completely dry. It was like it hadn't rained at all. In fact, the ground even looked a bit dehydrated, like it hadn't rained in a very long time. This was true for the entirety of the hike back to the car and the entire area itself as we drove out of there toward the relatively safety of the cabin we had rented for the next 7 days. We were able to get a motel room that was local to the cabin for an extra night, and even then, we didn't feel safe. Every time we stepped out of our room to do anything, we felt an ominous stare on us. I couldn't get any sleep, even in the motel room. I spent the entire night being terrified, too terrified to look out of the curtains or the windows or the peephole. I paced back and forth and could have sworn I heard, albeit far off in the distance of the woods surrounding the motel, the strange, animalistic yet somehow human sounds that we were hearing the night before. I would love to say we were at least able to enjoy the last 7 days of our honeymoon alone in a remote romantic cabin far away from humanity and civilization as we had planned and were so looking forward to. I would love to say that, but it would be a complete lie. The cabin was in the mountains, but in the middle of the same exact woods we were camping in before. The cabin was closer than the motel, even as we had to circle back to get to it. We heard the same sounds coming from the woods, and as each night passed, they seemed to be getting closer and closer. I fully believe that whatever this thing was had somehow tracked our sense, and maybe it was some sort of super sense where it just knew where we were based on smell or something else. I'm not really sure. Our final night in the cabin was the deal breaker for my wife as far as spending any time in the woods ever again. The strangest noises, the same animalistic howling combined with that same very human sound moaning noise, were all very loud and very obvious on the property we were renting. Also, there was another torrential downpour that night when there shouldn't have been anything, if any rain or inclement weather at all. During the day for those 7 days, we had a wonderful time, but we stayed mainly indoors for the fear of whatever this thing was returning and doing whatever it was planning to do with us in the first place, if anything at all. After all, shouldn't something that massive and seemingly intelligent been able to get into the tent? Shouldn't have been able to somehow get to us if it really wanted to while we were alone and at its mercy? There were at least one of those nights in the woods. We felt its eyes on us at all times, even when we were just standing in front of the windows and watching TV. There was no cell phone service, so we weren't able to look anything up. We weren't able to check and see what the weather was going to be like, though we were both sure there wasn't supposed to be any extreme weather. Once the honeymoon was over, we headed home, and though we've discussed it between ourselves many times, it wasn't until recently that we decided to research as to what in the world we had witnessed, and we were both sure we fell victim to for that time we spent in Colorado. We both agree it wasn't any known animal. My wife didn't see the eye and therefore didn't understand that it seemed to have been human somehow as well as animal as well. We still refer to this thing, whatever it was, as the creature, and so far have not found anything similar enough on the internet to what we experienced to believe. We have found anyone who has experienced the same thing. Was it supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial, or some sort of cryptid? I still have no clue, but as there are more and more people reporting strange disappearances in the woods, especially where there is random inclement weather, I am hoping we one day figure out what exactly we had come across. I don't know for sure how the weather plays into all of this, but I am sure that it did have something to do with it. I wish I had more answers, but I really don't have any clue. And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed this night-ending bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting this channel. It is your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.